right. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Still at home, trying to work it out. Today's topic is one of the most controversial topics of all time. It is about, as you can see here, Christopher Columbus, one of the most interesting people of history, and also one of the, obviously, I just said, controversial. So let's hear the whole story. Let's see. You probably know a lot about him already. Let's see if I can tell you some new stuff as well. You need one blank piece of paper. Here we go. Okay. Christopher Columbus. Okay, well, let's establish a couple things you already know. First of all, Columbus was from Italy. And we associate him, however, with the Spanish Empire, however. We've already we're going to discuss, coming up after this guy, the conquistadors of Spain. That's sort of what we sort of think of when we think of how Spain conquered and overtook many places within the Western Hemisphere. And so what I sort of like to think of is, even though Columbus wasn't a Spaniard, he was an Italian, he was like a scout. He was like the first scout being sent out by the Spanish for the purposes of conquest. Alrighty? He was sent by, and maybe you've heard their names before, the monarchs of Spain at this time were King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. Now, Columbus apparently had gone to several monarchs throughout Europe, and of course he had this crazy idea of how to get to India. And this is one of the important things we need to keep in mind here, is that he is looking for India and China. This is the main thing that he's looking for. By this time, Europeans had been to India, they had been to China, but they had always gone there by going around Africa or sailing through the Mediterranean, unloading in Egypt, caravanning their wares across the Egyptian desert to the Red Sea, putting it on a new ship and sailing to India. That was the fastest way. You could go around the Horn of Africa. A lot of Europeans were doing that. So Columbus had this idea that instead of going east to get to India and eventually China, you could go west. And of course, the whole point being, why could you do that? Because he was a believer. He was a believer that the earth was round. All right, so he took 4 total trips. We're familiar with 1492, the old fun saying, in 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue. So he took 4 trips altogether. The first trip he had 3 ships with him. I'll come back to those ships in just a moment. He took one of the ships on all 4 trips. I believe it was the Nina. And, that's really what we are looking at here. And if you think about the map of Europe, Spain is the nation that is furthest to the west in Europe, isn't it? Besides Portugal. And so it would make sense that the Spaniards would sort of take up a gamble on this because they're further to the west. They want to trade with these these civilizations, the Indians and the Chinese. So they're going to take a chance on it. So I say the myth. One of the myths is that Columbus proved the earth is round. He does not necessarily do that. He believes the earth is round. If you look at European people, by 1492, most educated people were on board. There's a lot of discussion that everybody thought the earth was flat, and that was just the way it was, and people were really dumb because of the Middle Ages. And people that were educated understood that the earth was round by that time. And I would also say Columbus never circumnavigates the globe. He does not sail all the way around the earth. He doesn't do that. Okay, he sails to the Western Hemisphere and back, like I said, 4 times up there. At this particular moment in history, and we have sort of delved into some of this already, the Europeans are ready. They're ready to go. They're ready to explore. They're ready to pop. They're ready to go do things. They're becoming a curious population of people. That's how I would sort of describe this. We've discussed how the Crusades have revitalized trade in Europe. We've discussed how the travels of Marco Polo and the opening of the Silk Road out to the Mongol Empire and China has revitalized trade coming to Europe. So Europeans are becoming a curious people, whereas other civilizations, the Chinese are a good example, whereas other civilizations are closing themselves off from the rest of the world, it's the Europeans that are the ones that are getting ready to go. Why? Why is this? Okay, so here we go. Now, you got to think about way back at the beginning in January when we started this course, and we need to talk about some of the things that we brought up at the beginning that I thought were very important. Let's see if you remember your acronym GAPS. And here we go. The Europeans had better specialized labor at this moment in history. Specialized labor. Remember that? GAPS, that's the last one. So let's go backwards, shall we? So let me give you some examples of the better specialized laborers in Europe. For example, Europeans just had better, more advanced militaries. They had better, here's where I was going to come back to this, they had better ships in Europe than anywhere else. The three ships, the Santa Maria, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria were three of the best ships on Earth at that time, compared to anywhere else on Earth. In Asia, certainly in the Americas, all over Europe. And don't kid yourself, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria were full-blown, they were warships. They were highly maneuverable. They were very tough in bad seas. Columbus thought, I think it's the Nina. Columbus thought that the Nina was the best ship he ever had in his long career as a captain. And of course, what could they put? I think this is an important thing to put on here. What were the Europeans putting on their ships at this time? Well, they're putting cannons on their ships. They're loading their ships up with cannons. So these types of things, this type of thing is very important. And you have to keep in mind that the European countries are very competitive with each other. So the Spanish shipbuilders are under a lot of pressure because they have to build better ships than the British shipbuilders, or the Portuguese shipbuilders, or the French shipbuilders. And remember, competition drives things. You all who play sports, who do you really want to play well for? Who do you practice better for? Who do you play harder against? Your rivals. So European countries are all rivals with each other. And so this is forcing specialized labor and the products of those various types of specialized laborers to be better. Here's something that we're going to come back to a little bit later, but I think is a hugely important aspect of Columbus, and that is this thing called the printing press, which I'm going to come back to in our discussions at a later date. But the printing press was invented in Germany in 1455. You can see just before Columbus's voyage. Now, here's something that I think is very important about Europe, the printing press in Europe. Printing is not invented in Europe. Printing is actually invented in China. This is another thing like gunpowder. Here you go, both these two. You talk about China in both of these two. Gunpowder comes out of China. The concept of printing comes out of China. But it's the Europeans that take these products. They don't invent these products, but they take these products to the next level. And one of the things that happened with printing in Europe was the printing press allowed the written word to expand to all classes of people. Even serfs could get access because books were made so quickly. It's a law of supply and demand. Suddenly there's the supply of books has increased because of the printing press. When the supply goes up, the price goes down. Lower class people have a chance to get educated. The Chinese did the opposite. The Chinese took printing. Now, they didn't have a printing press, but the Chinese took the printed word and the elites of China hoarded it. They kept it away from the common person. In China, they didn't want the common person to have any information. And I'll be honest, European kings and queens didn't necessarily love it that lower class people were getting the printed word, but that was a little bit of a difference. Okay, so now what is happening? Again, I've just sort of commented here that Europe is becoming a curious continent of people. All right, so they're starting to learn about all these things going on out there. They're starting to read about things. They're starting to read stories. I kind of touched upon the story of Marco Polo and his book about his travels to the Mongol Empire in China, etc. And his book was a bestseller in Europe. Marco Polo's voyage was done in the late 1300s, and Marco Polo's book is one of the first books printed in large amounts. And look, there's another thing, and that is that Christianity, Roman Catholic Christianity, has this desire to spread. And so there's an element that Columbus is going to be sponsored by the Roman Catholic Church. We're going to talk about the conquistadors of Spain next. They are going to want to be, the Roman Catholic Church is going to want them to spread the word of the Bible, spread the word of the Christian, the Catholic God. All right? Okay, so this is very important to them as well. Okay, draw that line that you see right there. And then here's some just other factoids that you might find interesting. This is, I learned this late. I didn't learn this when I was in school. I learned this reading about Columbus when I was an adult. But I found this very interesting, is that King Ferdinand gave Columbus a letter, and he wanted the letter delivered specifically to whoever the Khan of the Mongols was at that time. Yes, they were looking for India. Okay. Yes, they were looking for China. But the Mongols were still known. Europeans knew who the Mongols were by 1492, and they were still the Mongols, even though the Genghis Khan, the empire of Genghis Khan had sort of fallen by the wayside. The Mongols were still well known. Okay, so Columbus died in 1506, and look, there's an element. You know, he dies kind of a broken man. He believed that he was just off the coast of India somewhere. He believed that he had found India, that he hit a bunch of islands in what we would call the Caribbean Sea. The first island he hit was the island, he called it Hispaniola. It's the island today that has two countries on it, the Dominican Republic and Haiti. That was the first place he hit. And so he kept thinking that he was just somewhere off of the east coast of India. And so he would sail from these islands, he would keep sailing west, and he kept bumping into what we realize is now what we would call the mainland, Central America. And he kept trying to get around, and he could never do so, obviously because of the landmass of the Americas, which he didn't understand. But he always believed that. Okay, and this is one of the reasons why, and I think you know this part of the story already, he called the natives that he discovered on these islands, he called them Indians, because he believed that he was somewhere off the coast of India. And so this term, Indians, has stuck with Native Americans, certainly Native North Americans even, ever since, even though it's not really a correct name for the people of the Western Hemisphere. All right? Okay, so now, what is the importance of Christopher Columbus? Well, a lot. I think that obviously 1492 is this. Look at my course question. My course question revolves around the year 1492, doesn't it? 1492 is really, okay, we can talk about the Renaissance if you want, and I'll come back to that little chart here in a minute. But really it's 1492 that starts modern world history. This is the moment where Europeans start to dominate the globe. But not just, I have just Western Hemisphere written here. It's not just the Western Hemisphere, it's the globe. They're starting to dominate the whole globe with their European culture, their language, and certainly, listen, the Roman Catholic Church is successful. Christianity is going to go worldwide here. And you think about the Western Hemisphere, and really from Mexico south, Central America, South America is dominated by the Roman Catholic Church. All right? Let's see, what else can we say? We could say that, you might find this interesting, the transfer of goods is very interesting, I think. And for example, did you know that my parents, for example, grew up in Nebraska. And when you drive to Nebraska, I don't know how many of you have ever done that. It's pretty slow and boring. But if you drive through Nebraska, there's either corn or wheat. It's a plain state, it's flat. So you drive forever, you just see farmland. It's either corn or wheat. Okay, well, wheat isn't even native to North America, the Americas, but yet wheat has become a major product of the Americas. We can relate in Hawaii with sugar, can't we? Hawaii used to be a place where a lot of sugar was grown. Well, it's not even native to any area of the Western Hemisphere. It goes the other way as well. My ancestors were from Ireland. Okay, O'Briens are Irish people. Do you know about the potato famine in Ireland? This was a time in the 1800s that the potato crops failed. Potatoes became a major crop in Ireland. Potato crops failed in Ireland, forcing thousands and thousands of Irish people to leave Ireland and move to the United States. That's when my ancestors, the O'Briens, the original O'Brien sort of came over. But the point I'm trying to make is the potatoes aren't even from the Eastern Hemisphere. They were brought after 1492 to Europe, places like Ireland in Europe. Okay? And look, let's be honest with each other. This is the difficult part of this whole thing. This is the discussion that has, this is a fact of the matter, and this is sort of the tension that we have between Europeans and their ancestors and descendants of native peoples all over the place, not just the Western Hemisphere. Look, this is something that the Native Americans, what I call native Western Hemispherians, they don't like 1492, because they basically say from 1492 on, it's been bad for us. It's been bad news for us. But you cannot deny the fact that is a reality. Whether you think this is good or bad, whether you think this is just the way the world works, or whether you think this is some sort of calamity and terrible thing, the fact of the matter is it happened. Okay? So Native Americans are not necessarily in love with the year 1492. Why did Europeans, when Europeans got to the Americas, why were they successful? Why did they quote unquote win? Okay, well, I said this earlier, Europeans had better specialized labor. Okay, and they had better specialized labor because they had a bigger population. Okay, why did they have a bigger population? Here we go, SP, we're going backwards. Why did they have a bigger population? Because they controlled agriculture. Remember the old map of the Eastern Hemisphere that we drew at the beginning of the course? And what did I draw there? I drew the 4 river valleys. You did a project, the other river valley civilizations, remember? I talked about Egypt and the Nile. Some of you did Mesopotamia. Some of you did the Indus Valley. The Indus River is really what Columbus was looking for, and some of you did China. Well, by 1492, Europeans had control of the Nile, they had control of Mesopotamia, and they had control of the Indus Valley. So all this food is coming and being transported back into Europe, where the population goes boom. So they control the geography. The Western Hemisphere, on the other hand, had fewer people, because there was less agriculture, because the geography wasn't as good. Okay? All right, so now let me just sort of finish this off, and let me show you, if you recall this, remember this thing we did sort of the beginning of one of the very first things you did when we started to sit out. Okay, so here's the Renaissance, and 1400 approximately, I really would put 1492 is where we would say modern history begins. Okay, so now, if you were to ever go to Barcelona, Spain, okay, you might come across, you might visit this, if you ever are in your travels, you might visit and see this statue in Barcelona, Spain. It's a big column with a monument at the top, and if you kind of look at this guy, he's standing on top of something that's round, okay, and you go down a little bit further and you can see an anchor, okay, you got other people certainly, and you've got lions down there, and if you look a little bit carefully at the guy, there he is at the top, okay, and you can see he's pointing, he's doing something, there's that round thing, if you will, okay, and then if you keep looking, okay, so here's a little bit closer look at this, okay, the statue at the top seems to be pointing in a particular direction, and we discover that, there's sort of the bottom of it, okay, and we discover that he is pointing west. Okay, the guy is pointing west, and he appears, if you take a look very carefully, he appears to be pointing west, and he's got some sort of map type thing in his hand. And this is a famous statue of none other than Christopher Columbus himself at the top of a column in Barcelona, Spain. He's pointing west. They set it up that way, and this is the reasons in Barcelona is this was his takeoff point. This statue is 24 feet tall. That's where Barcelona was King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella were, and Columbus would report back to them after his first voyage. Okay. All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that. Very controversial, like I said, but I think very interesting as well. Somebody certainly well known to history and significant to history. All right, everybody. See you next time. Aloha.